money lost on every deal. All you need is no heart and a nerve of steel. Viva Las Vegas! Viva Las Vegas!
All right, you guys, we're back here. Hootie and JC show. Thank you, everybody. Joining us here today is a great author, Denny Griffin. Welcome to the show, Denny.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be on with you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to pass this over to Hootie so that Hootie can get a little bit more into this with Denny. Start us off.
Absolutely. Mr. Griffin, how are we doing today, sir?
Good, Hootie. Good. Thank you.
I've been a longtime fan of your writing. I'm not big on the Vegas stuff, but I'm big on your writing. I'm a big fan of you. The way you came up, the way you write. I wanted to have you on the show for a while now. I'm glad that we had a mutual friend that was able to make the introduction. A little later on in the episode, I mean, JC also has things in common, and also Mike does too. So we're going to kind of make it like a conversation instead of a Q&A, because you're a seasoned, you're pretty seasoned at this. And I just want you to tell everybody where you come from, how you grew up, and how you got into writing, and why you chose nonfiction and decided to write about out west.
Sure thing. I was born and raised in Rome, New York. It's right about in the middle of the state, in between Utica and Syracuse, the two bigger cities. And I went to school there, high school and so forth. After I joined the Navy, I did a 4-year stint. I got back and I was working in a copper mill in Rome. It was called the Copper City. And eventually the copper mill shut down, moved out of town. I was laid off. I knocked around as a car salesman and insurance salesman. And I found out, I probably shouldn't say it, but I was too honest to be a good salesman for some of these things. You had to skirt the exclusions and stuff if you wanted to sell any insurance policies. So I was not a raving success with the sales business, but I learned a lot in sales. I learned how to talk to people, and how to interview people, and how to get information. Now, the information I got was such things as, are you in a position to buy the car today, or do you need someone else with you to pick the color? That type of thing. But it was basically how to screen people. And that helped me out later on when I got into law enforcement. I first started out as a private investigator for Pinkerton, doing undercover work. And then I became started doing their open cases, which, insurance investigations, claims settlements. And I found that what I had learned from my sales experience was very beneficial to me in talking to people and interviewing people. After I retired, I found out I couldn't golf with any success. So I wanted another hobby, and I said, well, maybe I'll try my hand at writing. So my first book was a fictionalized account of a case I had actually investigated. And then I wrote some mystery thrillers.
Mr. Griffin, this was after college, or you didn't go to college? How'd that work?
I didn't go to college as a full-time student. I took courses. Okay. But I was never a full-time student.
Out of the Navy.
Right.
Okay.
I took criminal justice.
Okay.
Various courses, criminal investigation, all police related or justice related courses. But I didn't get a degree. I didn't graduate from the college. I just took individual courses. And I knocked around. I tried my hand at fiction writing for from 1994 until 2000, actually 2001. And I was treading well. It was a tough genre. I mean, there's a lot of great fiction, mystery, thriller writers. So I was debating whether or not I wanted to stay with writing at all. I was thinking about trying something else. And a lady at a writers' conference told me I should think about, with my background, I should think about doing police procedurals and true crime. So I decided to give it a shot. And my first effort from nonfiction was called Policing Las Vegas. and it was the history of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. And I worked with the department. They had to approve the project and give me assistance in getting information and records. And in that book, I knew I had to have, a Sin City book, you got to have a little mob stuff in it. And I didn't know what to write about. So one of the intelligence officers told me I should write about Tony Spilotro. And I said, who's Tony Spilotro? And the guy said, did you ever see Casino, the movie? And I said, yeah. He said, well, Pesci was based on Spilotro. I said, really? I said, I didn't know that. He said, yeah. He said, that was probably about 90% accurate. He said, a little Hollywood in it, but a lot of the stuff was what really came down. So I did enough to put a section in the police history book about Spilotro. And I became kind of captivated. I went out and at the time, everything was VCR tapes, VHS tapes. I bought the tape and I played the movie over and over again and kept coming up with ideas and questions. So then I wrote a book called The Battle for Las Vegas, the Law versus the Mob. And that was the true story behind the movie Casino. And through that, I started meeting former law enforcement, former FBI, and then former mobsters. And that kind of opened the door for everything else. I started getting offers to write books with some of the former mobsters. And with the Battle for Las Vegas, I found out the lawmen were a little ticked off because they felt the Casino movie, was all from the mob standpoint. And that the good work they had done and all the effort they put into this war they had with the mob didn't get proper credit. So they were glad. It turned out they were glad to talk and tell their side of the story. So that was the door opener when I did the police history book, and then what followed.
So you got the idea, and you didn't even see the movie Casino yet. That I didn't know. Back in what, 95, I think Casino fell. I didn't watch these movies till later on myself because I thought it was all BS at the time. Because I was
1995.
Yeah. So it was 95, and you had no idea this movie came out. So you weren't a big movie guy then at the time, like, right?
I wasn't. I had seen The Godfather. I guess everybody saw that, the various episodes, and some other organized crime stuff I liked. But I wasn't a fanatic about it, take it or leave it.
All right. So you started writing about Vegas. What year was that? 2000 and.
I started the history book in 2001. It wasn't published until 2005. It took me 4 years to get it finished and out.
Wow. And then there was other books about Vegas as well, wasn't there? Or was that your only one?
That was the first one about Vegas. And then what followed on the heels of that one was The Battle for Las Vegas, the Law versus the Mob, which was the story behind the movie. And then I got involved with Frank Collada, the former mobster, and he'd been the technical consultant to Casino. And we co-authored 4 books about Vegas mob era, the Spilotro era.
Him.
And then through that, I met 2 or 3 other guys who heard about the Collada books, liked them, and they reached out to me, wanted to know if I'd work with them on writing their books. These were former mob guys. So that opened the door, really. That was the turning point in my writing career, was that first book.
You co-authored the book with, I think, another author about something on the East Coast as well, didn't you?
Yeah, I did one called Surviving the Mob. It was a former Gambino guy who had flipped and become a government witness. In fact, he worked for Nicky Carrazzo. He was part of the Carrazzo crew.
Was that wasn't Leonardo, was it?
DiGennato.
DiGennato, yeah.
Yeah, Andrew, right? DiGennato, yeah.
Right? That's who you co-wrote that book with him, right?
I did.
Because that was one of the few books I wrote because I came up through, Nicky Carrazzo's crew as a bookmaker when I was 14. I worked in one of his offices, so I was very familiar with the crew. And that was the first time I seen your name. And then I didn't remember it until years later because you were writing books out in Vegas.
Right.
And I had no idea. And I happened to, he was on another show that I was on, Andrew. And his book was pretty good because he got pretty graphic in that book.
Yes.
You know, he was in some deep stuff. I mean, he was hanging out with the, boss and Consigliere's sons. And
It was a fun book to write because he did go into detail. And
yeah,
for me, it was interesting. You know, I mean, some projects are work,
right.
but these books to me are not, well, they're work, but they're educational to me.
Right.
Every time I write one of these books, I learn things I never knew before.
Right.
And it's really, to me, a fun project, fun work.
And usually when you get a guy writing a book, he doesn't have work like Andrew had. Andrew was putting work in. Everywhere the guy went, he carried a pistol. He was having shootouts. He was shooting people. He was doing robberies. He was a wild kid back in Brooklyn. That was one of the things why I know they were looking to chase him or clip him. Because I know that was going around. I was hearing his name all over the place. He was a wild kid. So I know, like, when you write a book about a guy like that, it's for real. When usually, when you write a book, the guy was around or the guy was there, he really wasn't involved, or a lot of guys aren't like Andrew who could give you firsthand knowledge of stuff that was going on.
That's very true. And the guys you're talking about, they're fun to talk to, but as far as the book, where are you going with it? I mean, everything's hearsay, and well, so-and-so
Right.
told me this, and I heard that.
And
Well, that's good conversation if you're having a beer or something, and you want to shoot the breeze. But if you're going to try to put a book out on that, you got to have more than that. You got to have, like you say, the firsthand knowledge. That's what you got to have.
And which is tough because then you got to fact check and you got to put more time in. And it's more legwork, and you're pulling up court documents, and you got to get people that can vouch for the guy if he's not known, because he hasn't done anything. He's just giving you secondhand knowledge. None of that stuff is firsthand. So growing up in Rome, now thank you for your service as well. I guess it was Vietnam that you served in.
Yeah, well, I wasn't actually I was in during the time, but I was in the Navy, Naval Air Force. So
Okay.
I didn't do any ground tour.
Okay, listen, you still went out there and sacrificed. It doesn't matter, and we thank you for your
Thank you.
sacrifice
Thank
for
you,
that.
So
Absolutely.
thank you very much.
And like I said, I mean, that was the first time I remember seeing your name and then not hearing about it till years later, until it was mentioned by a mutual friend recently. And I was like, oh, wow, this, Mr. Griffin wrote Andrew's book. And I love the writing. I love what you did with it. The Spilotro story has been told. You not knowing about even the movie Casino and then writing about it so many years later and being really on point shows me how much you did your homework on that. And that's pretty impressive because I didn't know that till now. I knew you wrote the book afterwards, but I didn't know that you didn't know about the movie at the time when it was brought to your attention. Because I had a few friends that were consultants on that movie as well, pit bosses, and they showed De Niro the signs and how he was supposed to stand. And back in Vegas, old time friends of mine, older gentlemen, and very well, and I'm very impressed with it. And we're gonna make a big announcement here today. And I know JC and Mike, they got some questions for you because they're big West Coast guys, and I'd like to see what they got to say about these books that you wrote.
I have a question related to where you're at right now with the conversation. He said he's from Rome, New York.
Yes.
I believe that's where Ori is from. Did they know each other?
We went to school together. Yeah, we were
nice.
in high school together, and yeah, we weren't in the same cliques, we weren't, but we knew each other. Yes.
Awesome.
It's interesting, Denny. I went to college and had a class with a guy that's now an FBI agent out of the Seattle field office. So, we end up crossing paths with schools and other things. It's when you look back, it's a little ironic sometimes seeing that, career cops, career criminals, career authors, a little bit of everybody comes from these tough situations, the neighborhood, the types of neighborhoods we all came from.
Yeah, it is ironic, and it surprised me initially when I would, for example, we did back in the early 2005, 2006, I had a little TV show in Las Vegas, and it was called Vegas and the Mob. And I had an in studio one night, some of the stuff we did by phone, that was before Zoom and all this stuff, either phone or live. And I had Frank Collada, I invited him. He was not living in Vegas, but he was visiting in Vegas. So I booked him, and I got two of the FBI agents, one who would handle the skim investigations, the straw man investigations, another one who would handle the street crimes investigations, or to get in the RICO stuff, and the boss of the Intel division, the former boss of the Intel division for Metro, Las Vegas Metro. And I was a little apprehensive. I'm thinking, now I'm going to have these four guys in the same room. You know, is this going to be like a icy atmosphere, fists going to fly, you know? And I tell you, it was a cordial session. I mean, they laughed and, you know, talking about, oh, do you remember the night we were doing the surveillance and you did this? And then Frank says, yeah, and I remember I had you bastards in my rearview mirror. I know where you were, blah, blah, blah. And then he'd bust their chops and tweak them a little bit. Then they'd come back good naturedly, and, you know, and they'd laugh it off. And I was really fascinated by the interaction between these guys with the varying background, but it was like you know, what they did when they were doing it was strictly business. It was their jobs. Frank had his gig, his thing. The cops had their thing, and there was no hard feelings. There was no animosity.
Yeah,
That's something I'm actually gonna. That's actually something I'm gonna touch on with the Hootie's thought, because people always say government, government, government. When it's one or two people, we'll talk about that during the Hootie's thought. Mr. Griffin, what I wanted to ask was, were you writing from Rome, New York, or did you move to Hollywood, or did you move to Vegas? Like, active. I know you, like, we'll get into that, but like, first, how did it work when you went to school in Rome, you went away to the war, came back after 4 years, and you started writing where? Vegas, California?
My first book was, I started that when I got to Vegas. So we started doing the Snowbird gig at that time. We were doing Rome, New York, and Las Vegas. We had been to Vegas a few times on gambling junkets, you know, the week-long things. And we really loved the weather and the excitement and the action. So we bought a place in Vegas. We moved there in November of 1994. And that's when I started my first manuscript, November 94. I'd never written anything before, but like reports, you know, just dry, yes, no, fill in the blanks type stuff. I was not a writer. And the last case I worked on with New York State, one of the guys who had been involved in that said he had written a manuscript. So he sent it to me. And it was really a piece of crap. And I thought to myself, he didn't do this thing any justice. And he couldn't find a publisher. So I said, I'm going to write it, but I'm going to tell the truth. I said, I'm going to give it a shot. So one afternoon, I was watching a doubleheader football game. I had a couple of 12 packs in the fridge. And when I was down almost the end of the second 12 pack, I said, okay, this is it. The typewriter can be an old typewriter. I didn't know how to use it or anything. I was a one finger typist. And I had to have a lot of whiteout. But I got what I thought was the first chapter. By the time I finished the 12 pack, I had the first chapter done. I was all excited. I called to my wife. I said, you got to come out and see what I did. She comes out and I'm trying to show her. I had that last can of beer. I tip it over on top of the manuscript and it's all soaked in beer. I said, that's it. God sent me a message. I'm not supposed to be a writer. So unbeknown to me, she took it. She used the blow dryer. She dried the manuscript. The next day when I was sober, she handed it back to me and says, here, I thought you might want this. So I said, well, maybe that wasn't the message I was getting after all. Maybe it was just to temper my enthusiasm. So I ended up finishing the manuscript, and that was my first book. It was fiction, a fictionalized account of a real incident. And that was the start.
So now, the famous guys that you wrote books with, was Andrew, meaning wise guys, Andrew, Frank Collada, any other street guys?
Ori Spado.
Ori Spado, right? You were the writer for Ori Spado's book.
Yes.
And those are the only street guys. Now,
Nope, Joey Silvestri. Joey Silvestri was a New York guy. Old school. He's, you take one in the head before you give up an associate. Doesn't matter whether they're going to kill you. If you find out you're on the hit parade, it doesn't make any difference. You never help the law under any circumstances. So Joey was a real, like I say, old school type.
right.
But had some great stories, a great life. So they did his book. He was so there's like 5 or 6 different ones, I guess.
Very good. And then you wind up staying in Vegas, or did you go to California? Did anybody ever try to turn them into a TV series or a movie or anything like that?
We optioned one of the Collada books. We optioned it for a documentary, and things look pretty promising as far as one of the not a major network, but one of the major pay-per-view type operations. And then, but it was going to be about Frank's life. Frank died last August.
Right.
And Frank was going to be the star of the show. I mean, it was going to be his thing, and he was going to be on every episode. Right. So when that happened, that kind of ended that deal. So that was the closest I've come so far, was the option on the one book of Frank's.
Okay. And then no other, and that was just, did you ever make it to California and rub elbows with any of the elites?
I went to California, went to some session. What happened was, through all this, I got involved with Henry Hill, of Goodfellas fame, and they're not in writing, but Henry and his, at the time, girlfriend, she was a real hustler, promotion. And she was always out there setting up stuff. And of course, Henry handled the New York piece of things from his perspective. And they wanted somebody that could appear with Henry and do some Chicago stuff, and like joint appearances. So I met them and we started doing gigs in California. Okay. Then I introduced Henry to Andrew and Frank. They never met each other. And then all of us started doing things, and I was getting gigs in Vegas for the forum. I would be the host or the moderator or panel, and I had these guys on. And it was fun dealing with Henry at the time. I don't know if he was still on drugs at the time. I know alcohol was a big thing.
An alcoholic.
Oh yeah, he was. And every time I booked him for something, it was an adventure. She didn't know if he'd show up, and you didn't know if he showed up, what kind of shape he'd be.
Right.
And it was so. I remember one night with the Clark County Library in their theater. The theater held, I think, it was 400 people, and then they had an overflow room which held about another 100 with a closed circuit set up. And Henry, say what you want about him, he could draw a crowd. He had that the good fellow stuff behind him, and people just loved him. And I remember they had the microphones on the tables, a microphone in front of each guy. And Henry came in, and he apparently had a rough afternoon. We went on at 7:00. Henry was there, Andrew was there, Frank Collada was there, a couple of FBI agents were there. And of course, I had to include everybody, ask her. I couldn't just concentrate on Henry, but I wanted to try to keep him awake. So I'm getting him involved as much as I can, and I'm looking at him out of the corner of my eye while I'm talking to other panelists. And I see Henry's head starts slowly going down. Then he'd catch himself and straighten up. And finally, one time he didn't quite make it, and his forehead slammed into the microphone. And it sounded like a gun going off. And the audience screams. People are diving under their chairs thinking there's a hit in progress. God, it was, and Henry, of course, that snapped him back to attention. And one woman was running toward the door trying to get out. She thought there was gunfire going on. Henry hollered to her, he says, "Where are you going?" And she stopped dead in her tracks, terrified. She looks down, she's tried to talk, she couldn't talk, she stuttered. And I'm going to the ladies' room. He said, "Oh, no, you're not. You know too much."
Oh,
So it was really an experience dealing with Henry, I got to tell you.
Yeah, he was somewhat around my neighborhood, but the guys that were his age didn't really have anything nice to say about him. Like,
No.
not how he played himself out to be, besides the junkie part in Goodfellas.
you know, speaking of Goodfellas and movie stuff, you know, Denny, one thing that there's a lot of things Hootie and I have in common, one of which is we did not watch these Hollywood movies prior to getting involved. And with me, I'm very thankful that I didn't. The only even remotely related mob movie I had ever seen was The Untouchables, in which obviously that's Al Capone. That's a long time ago. And so when I met the guys that I met, I went in there with no preconceived notion about how you're supposed to behave or any of that stuff. And I'm glad I did, because I learned it naturally. And later on, when I watched Hollywood movies, I did see Casino a little bit after it came out, but by then I had already been affiliated for a couple of years. I'm glad I didn't, though, because I think I would have had a preconceived notion, and it would have influenced the way I would have behaved going in, and it may have messed things up actually for me. And I saw a lot of guys who had no affiliation with LCN who would watch those movies, and then they would start to emulate it and like wannabes, sort of. You know, you speak to the whole influence of Hollywood thing.
I think you make a good point. You're probably, especially with, you know, for somebody that has inside knowledge of what the real deal is and what the real story is, you're probably better off not to watch some of this stuff. First, you're going to know a lot of it's crap, sensationalism, you know, to get an audience or sell books or whatever it is. And that's not really what you want. At least my thing is, I want the truth.
Yes.
I want to know what it was really like, not because you're trying to sell something or whatever. I want to know what actually happened. And I found in dealing with my co-authors, these books I co-authored with the former mob guys. It didn't start out, I mean, nobody knew me. And you got to gain the trust of people. They're not going to tell you everything. They're not going to be candid with you if they think you're a piece of crap, or that you're going to sabotage them, or you got your own motives, you know, and to hell with them. And it was the same thing with the law guys. They don't know me. My first thing was to cultivate a friendship, or not a friendship, but a relationship, an acquaintance with a former FBI agent. And after we, you know, talked and emailed and met in person a couple of times, he started confiding in me. And then he reached out to some of his former colleagues and said, "Would you talk to this guy? I think he's a pretty good guy," you know. And what I did, and what I do with everyone that I work with, is it's a partnership. I consider it a partnership. And they have to trust me, I have to trust them. And I tell them right up front, it's taken me a long time to build a reputation. I'm not going to blow it by taking just your word for things.
Right.
And if I ever catch you lying to me, our deal is off. And I had one case where it sounded like a hell of a story, really sounded good. And I was doing a little checking. The guy was sending me, you know, he'd write out a chapter and I'd edit it and organize it and so forth. And he had this one situation where he was claiming credit for a bank robbery. Well, I checked, he was in prison at the time. So I'm thinking, now, wait a minute, how much of this other stuff is bullshit, you know? And so that ended that deal. I said, I'm not going any further. I said, I told you to begin with, my reputation's at stake here. And if I put my name on the line, it's damn well going to be as accurate as I can make it. And, you know, sometimes something's going to slip through the cracks. I mean, you can only do so much, but so fact checking, making sure I got the right story is key to me. And after I would write a chapter, after I do write a chapter, even today, I send it to that individual and say, I want you to proofread this. Is it right? Is there anything that needs to be changed? Have I got anything wrong? Nope, everything's right. Can we prove it? Is there any documentation anywhere that you did this or that this, even if it was a cold case and nobody was ever arrested for it, is there documentation that the robbery happened? You know, a newspaper article, something.
Yeah.
And because I'm telling them, it's not only my reputation on the line, it's your reputation on the line. And if you don't have credibility, you got nothing.
Absolutely.